Wow. Operation Putin 2.0. Panic at Engels airbase. Friendly drones have blown up the Russian base in Millerovo. Zen military bloggers are having a meltdown. A one-way ticket for the occupiers. Fiery footage is blowing up the internet. Shock! Wagner is being kicked out of Africa. We'll tell you more about this rat war among war criminals coming up.
The threat of mobile homes. No, this isn't the plot of another blockbuster, but a new phobia among Russians. Rumors are spreading online that, supposedly on the night of August 8th, drones and FPVs were launched from a Toyota truck. While Russians were busy figuring out what these haunted houses, or rather drone houses, were, those very drones were striking strategic targets in Russia. Thus, drones arrived at night in Millerovo, Rostov region. The likely target was the local military airfield. The explosions were heard in the city at night, after which local residents saw a glow from the fire.
The extensive and large-scale SBU operation, codenamed Web, which was meticulously carried out deep within the vast expanse of Russian territory, unequivocally demonstrated the significant and profound potential of effectively utilizing unconventional guerrilla tactics against crucial and strategically important military targets. This development, in turn, poses a truly serious and considerable threat to the Russian Federation and its citizens, primarily because it doesn't necessarily have to be a conventional house on wheels, but rather could be something far more insidious and difficult to detect. Well, right now Russians are fixated on this. Here comes a trailer, a house on wheels. That's the source of the threat.
The Russians claimed that their air defense repelled all the attacks, but as we know, videos on the internet don't burn, unlike the fuel tanks at the attacked GSMRT base.
Before striking Ukraine, the planes have to take off from their bases, then land at the Engels airbase, meticulously load the powerful missiles prepared there, refuel their aircraft, take off again, fly to the vast Caspian Sea, and from that strategic location, launch their devastating missiles. The Engels Air Base still remains a critically important key point for these massive and continuous missile strikes.
There is news about another expulsion of Wagner PMC, this time from Africa. Russia is insisting on winding down the activities of the Wagner private military company in the Central African Republic and replacing it with the Africa Corps, which is controlled by the Russian Ministry of Defense. This was reported by the Associated Press, citing sources. In addition, Moscow is reportedly demanding that the security services it provides be paid for not with natural resources, as before, but in cash.
Wagner PMC is conducting the main combat operations against the rebels, and in fact, the local government relies specifically on the actions of Wagner PMC. Furthermore, I would note that Wagner PMC still maintains a presence directly on the territory of the Republic of Belarus. According to various estimates, there are between 4,000 and 5,000 people.
The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has switched from anger to mercy, or more precisely, is creating the appearance of doing so, in order to continue deceiving US President Donald Trump. To this end, Putin has even agreed to meet with Trump to discuss the war in Ukraine.
In fact, by raising the stakes, the Russian dictator is well aware that the Russian economy is facing enormous problems. In July alone, the budget deficit increased by 1.2 trillion rubles.
Getting by and finding ways around things, that's so typical of the Kremlin. For example, thanks to deception, the Russians managed to circumvent sanctions and even purchase equipment from the German company Siemens for the state-owned explosives manufacturer.
Even in today's globalized world, it's extremely difficult to prevent purchases for the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex, which uses either shell companies or, accordingly, intermediary countries. In other words, necessary raw materials and equipment for the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex are being purchased through third countries, where the end user is listed not as the Russian side, but for example a company in Pakistan, China, or a number of other countries in the Middle East.
On the night of August 8th, Russia once again attacked Ukraine from the air. The enemy used 108 aerial attack assets. Air defense forces neutralized 82 targets, including 3 jet-powered drones.
These are not new drones, they are upgraded older models. But indeed, the level of danger is demonstrably and significantly increasing. Look, so far the enemy has primarily used Shaheds, which are unmanned aerial vehicles equipped with gasoline internal combustion engines. These particular drones are known for being relatively slow flying, making them somewhat slow targets to intercept, especially when compared to more advanced aerial threats. That is precisely why the countermeasures that were employed and utilized against them were in essence quite similar and about the same.
Nevertheless, Ukrainian defenders managed to repel enemy attacks both in the air and on the ground. Russia continues to suffer massive losses in its war against Ukraine. According to reports from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, over the past day the Ukrainian army eliminated 1,040 occupiers, as well as 7 tanks and 7 armored fighting vehicles.
Urgent! Russia is meddling in Moldova again. The parliamentary elections are under threat. Danger! Russia is launching an influence operation targeting the Moldovan diaspora.
As always, Russia is trying to impose its own rules in someone else's house. The Kremlin is preparing large-scale interference in Moldova's parliamentary elections.
Unlike the Western nations, we do not meddle in the internal affairs of other people.
The parliamentary elections in Moldova will take place on September 28th. And already now, according to President Maia Sandu, the Kremlin is not just interfering, but is preparing an unprecedented campaign to undermine the country's sovereignty and democratic institutions.
Russia intends to control Moldova starting this fall and is preparing an unprecedented interference in the September elections. The risks to public order and national security are high, and all institutions as well as society as a whole must recognize the danger and defend themselves against it. The Kremlin is investing in several political projects to get its people into the next parliament in order to gain control over power in the Republic of Moldova.
To undermine the democratic process, Moscow is deploying an entire arsenal of tools, from bribing voters and cyber attacks to large-scale information campaigns and paid rallies. The funding, of course, is being provided covertly, including through cryptocurrencies. According to Maia Sandu, about 100 million euros have been allocated for this. The aggressor country also plans to activate tried-and-true influence mechanisms in strategically sensitive regions such as Gagauzia and Transnistria. They will also involve the Moldovan diaspora abroad, whose turnout last year played a decisive role in the presidential elections and the referendum on European integration.
Russia has never left us alone, and since the 1990s they have regularly interfered in our elections in one way or another. The difference now, of course, is that the scale has changed. Now this is many times, perhaps by orders of magnitude, a more intense interference. Much more money is being spent and their methods have become much more cunning. Now they don't just need some pro-Russian force, as was the case before. Now even some so-called pro-Europeans are playing on their side, and we actually know who they really are. And in this complex, cunning way, they are now trying to change the balance of power in the Republic of Moldova.
The Russians are also acting through a chain of puppets and proxy structures. At the center of this scheme is the fugitive oligarch Ilan Shor, who was convicted in Moldova for multi-million-dollar embezzlement, but is actively involved in undermining the country from abroad. According to Chisinau, he is the main channel for funding pro-Russian projects, from bribing voters to organizing rallies staged for Russian media coverage.
Europe today is run by amateurs and
one such project is the Victory Bloc, which the Central Election Commission refused to register due to violations related to Shor. This sparked a strong reaction in Moscow, where they immediately started talking about the oppression of the opposition and Western interference.
the PAS party, Maia Sandu's party, has already begun taking appropriate steps to mobilize the largest possible number of voters.
But we understand that Moscow's true goal is not fair elections, but revenge. The Kremlin is trying to divide Moldovan society along the lines of language, geography, and religion. Sound familiar?
If we had a shared border with Russia, this would have happened long ago, and there would hardly be anything here that could save us. But for now, what saves us is that Ukraine stands between us, holding strong, and the Odessa region, which Putin has long been eyeing it, but it has not surrendered. And we know that the enemy was driven out from near Mykolaiv, from near Kherson, and from Kherson itself as well. So right now they are quite far from us. The reserves they have here in the so-called Transnistria, the uncontrolled regions of the Republic of Moldova, are not enough to do anything serious. Yes, there might be some local provocations, but even that I highly doubt, because Kyiv has repeatedly made it clear. Kyiv's official authorities have told Chisinau, just let us know, and we will resolve this issue in a matter of days. In other words, that territory will be completely liberated. Our authorities do not want this. They don't want any real armed confrontation here. That's why such permission was not given to Kyiv. Nevertheless, it had an effect.
Time goes by, but the aggressor country's playbook doesn't change. Absolutely everything is being used. Essentially, we're talking about a hybrid war where money, fake news, and distrust become weapons, and the goal is not only to influence the outcome, but also to destroy people's faith in the democratic process itself. All of this is happening as Moldova is on the verge of starting negotiations to join the EU. The Kremlin understands the September elections are the last chance to bring Moldova back into its orbit. That means the fight will be tough, and its outcome will determine whether the country becomes part of a European future or once again falls under the shadow of Russian influence.
USA versus Russia. Tough sanctions are already on the way. The bunker dweller is panicking. The meeting of the century. Trump, Zelensky, and Putin might sit down at the same table. The Caucasus without Russia. Armenia and Azerbaijan are putting a bold period in the White House. This is a historic blow to the Kremlin.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Today, Azerbaijani President Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan will sign a peace agreement at the White House. It provides for the creation of a strategic transit corridor that will run through Armenia to Azerbaijani territory and will be under U.S. control.
This is a huge blow to Putin's ambitions. The meeting between Pashinyan and Aliyev in Washington, because Moscow has traditionally considered itself the hegemon in the South Caucasus region. And today we are witnessing that the long-standing and deeply rooted conflict, along with numerous complex contradictions between Armenia and Azerbaijan, are currently being addressed and discussed in Washington. And obviously this is a big victory for Trump.
It seems like a clear signal to Putin that his involvement no longer carries weight and that Russia is losing its influence in the Caucasus.
I hope to reach some agreements that will set the situation on a path of constructive development, not only between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but also in the region as a whole.
This may also indicate a resolution, or at least a de-escalation of the tense situation in the Caucasus, and obviously without Moscow's involvement. Yet another confirmation that Putin's adventure with the invasion of Ukraine has weakened him in several strategic areas at once.
Indian companies are refusing Russian oil after Trump imposed tariffs and accused them of financing the war against Ukraine.
President Trump made it very clear that it is unacceptable for India to continue financing this war by purchasing oil from Russia. People will be shocked to learn that India is in fact dependent on China for buying Russian oil.
This is more of a forced move because it is obviously beneficial for India to buy cheap Russian oil. But under the significant pressure of tariffs and indeed under the considerable pressure of the current position of the American president, they have to adjust their course. And in principle, we are now witnessing a notable and significant shift in India's economic policy, a development that is certainly worth observing closely.
At the same time, the Indian authorities continue to insist that giving up cheap oil is not in their national interest.
For us, the well-being of our farmers is of the highest value. India will never compromise on the welfare of its farmers, dairy industry, and fishermen. And I personally know that I will have to pay a high price for this. But I'm ready for it, and my country is ready for it.
It is obvious that the tariffs imposed by the US on India look rather threatening. And as the political leader of this country, Modi still has to take into account the position of the United States, because unlike China, India does not have such a large economy or such extensive connections in other parts of the world.
Putin has already confirmed a meeting with Trump next week and stated that he plans to meet in the Emirates.
We have many wonderful friends who are readily prepared to help us meticulously organize significant events of this particular kind. Because one of our esteemed friends, the distinguished President of the United Arab Emirates, I truly think will ultimately decide, but that would certainly be one of the most suitable, quite appropriate, and indeed ideal places.
The Russian dictator is still not ready to meet with President Zelensky.
I have already said repeatedly and quite clearly that I have absolutely nothing against it in general. It is entirely possible. But certain essential conditions must be carefully created for this to happen. But unfortunately, we are still very far from truly creating such necessary conditions.
Today marks another Trump deadline given to Putin to end the war. When asked whether Trump would impose secondary sanctions as he had previously promised, he gave an evasive answer.
That will depend on him. We are going to see what he says. It all depends on him, but I am very disappointed.
As of now, to definitively state that we have any concrete confirmation from Vladimir Putin himself about his genuine willingness to bring an end to this ongoing war, there simply isn't any verifiable evidence whatsoever. But at the very same time, the Kremlin profoundly understands the inherently unstable psychological state of the current American president and is skillfully making the absolute most of this precarious situation for their own strategic benefit, effectively utilizing a certain discernible vacuum in Donald Trump's mind to meticulously adjust both the perceived scope of potential threats emanating from America and, quite obviously, to carefully modify direct actions that could potentially and negatively affect Russia's continued ability to prosecute this protracted and costly war.
Judging by the latest statement, the US president does not intend to meet with Putin in person, but wants the meeting to be held in a trilateral format with Zelensky.
They both genuinely want to meet with me, and I wholeheartedly agree and will do absolutely everything possible to effectively stop the senseless killings.
Recent events clearly show that Putin's opinion is carrying less and less weight in international politics, and most important decisions, even in so-called allied countries, are now being made without Russia's involvement.
Urgent. Belarus is turning into a military staging ground. Russia has transferred 2 trainloads of troops in a week. Equipment and personnel are coming straight from the front lines. Zapad 2025 exercises. Peace, friendship, chewing gum, or what is the Kremlin really planning? NATO is on high alert. Putin, get ready.
The first trainload of Russian troops and equipment has arrived in Belarus. Everything is by the book, loud statements and promises of strong friendship. But what is really behind this new wave of allied activity?
As of today, the military alliance between Russia and Belarus is an essential condition for the further development of our states. This is of great importance given the current threats. With the start of the special military operation, this became a top priority, said a serviceman of the Russian armed forces.
The Belarusian Ministry of Defense immediately reported preparations have begun for the strategic exercises Zapad 2025, which are scheduled for September. They insist that the maneuvers are supposedly routine and are held once every 2 years.
But history teaches us it was precisely under the guise of exercises in 2021 that Russia moved troops to the Ukrainian border and already at the beginning of 2022 launched a full-scale invasion.
The very first echelons with military equipment that have recently arrived in Belarus, they can be effectively used both for practicing coordination and tactical maneuvers and for the further significant buildup of formidable strike forces.
And although the official scenario of the exercises is still classified, its direction is obvious. After all, the playbook is the same, the scenario is the same: troop redeployment, creation of a strike force, preparation for future operations, all the things the aggressor used to start the large-scale war with Ukraine.
In this case, coordination between Ukraine and our Western partners is necessary in order to send a signal, I believe, not only to the Russian Federation, but also to Belarus about the inadmissibility of using these exercises as a cover for preparing offensive actions. After all, we understand that the Russians still have the temptation, for example, to open a northern front against Ukraine or to launch a special operation against, say, the Suwalki corridor. Obviously, that would involve Poland, that would involve Lithuania, and there are various scenarios.
The key question remains the scale. So far, the official statements mention 12, 13, or 14,000 servicemen. However, according to the intelligence services of the Baltic states, up to 150,000 troops could be involved in the maneuvers. If these numbers are confirmed, it would be the largest concentration of troops on NATO's eastern flank in recent years.
The Russian Federation and Belarus will likely downplay the actual number of servicemen participating in these military exercises. Therefore, the risks will remain. But let's carefully consider and thoroughly examine to what extent, in this particular and specific case, the comprehensive preventive process will actually and effectively work, and how it might truly unfold over time. After all, we remember how even Kelosh himself came to visit Lukashenko. We also vividly remember a significant number of important statements and the current ongoing redeployment of German Eurofighter jets to Poland, and indeed many other crucial actions involving the extensive redeployment, specifically of military servicemen and personnel to NATO's eastern flank, a strategically vital region.
At the same time, other alarming steps are emerging. For example, a new airborne assault brigade is being formed in Belarus. Where do you think? Of course, right at the Ukrainian border. This was announced by the commander of the Belarusian Special Operations Forces, Vadim Denisenko. According to him, the units are being stationed in the Gomel region north of Chernihiv and Kyiv regions.
As of today, this is, so to speak, the most concerning direction, which keeps all of us on alert. That's why the decision was made to create a separate airborne assault brigade there. And as of now, we have already begun forming this brigade. One of the battalions has already been formed.
We are talking about the 37th Guards Airborne Assault Brigade. Its formation is part of a large-scale strengthening of the Belarusian army. New artillery and air defense missile units are also being created. And on top of that, the parliament is discussing rewriting the law on martial law to expand the powers of the President, the Security Council, and the Ministry of Defense.
Currently, Putin is relying on several crucial pillars that support his regime. The first pillar is the belief that the Ukrainian response is an anomaly and that such resistance will not occur in European countries. The second significant assertion being made is that Article 5 of the NATO-Washington Treaty, which outlines the principle of collective defense, is in fact a profound myth, and that consequently the alliance as a whole will demonstrably not be able to provide a sufficiently robust or adequate response in the event of an attack, thereby undermining its fundamental purpose and credibility. And the third crucial pillar of this strategic alignment is that the People's Republic of China will significantly strengthen the geopolitical and economic position of the Russian Federation in terms of comprehensive economic and political cooperation, since it is profoundly beneficial for China to effectively put the United States in a difficult and challenging bind. And thus, while the United States is fully occupied with the ongoing situations in Russia and Europe, China will then decisively resolve the long-standing Taiwan issue, asserting its sovereign claims.
Without a doubt, the West 2025 exercises are a challenge not only to Ukraine, but to the entire region. Despite the fact that, according to the Ukrainian State Border Guard Service, there are currently no signs of a threat to our country, Kyiv is preparing for any outcome, as are its Western allies. Poland has already announced in response to the actions of Moscow and Minsk that it will conduct its own large-scale exercises, Iron Defender, with the participation of NATO allies. The question now is whether these exercises will remain merely a show of force or become yet another round of escalation. Only time will tell.